Hey guys, I hope everyone is doing well. Sorry, I wasn't sure if my computer was actually recording there or not. Hope you guys are doing well. So we started reviewing Unit 1 the other day, and I just wanted to kind of finish up our review on Unit 1, and then that way when we meet tomorrow, we'll be able to start in on Unit 2. And if you have any questions about Unit 1, or you want to make sure that, or you say like, hey, you kind of forgot something that we mentioned in class, we can finish that. It'll be much quicker than starting halfway through Unit 1, and we might not even get to Unit 2. Like I said, I'm trying to cover at least 2 units this week, 2 units next week, and so on and so forth, so that, and I think we have 3.5 weeks before your test, and I want to make sure we cover each unit and give it enough time as you guys need. We finished off with the new monarchies last time, and a couple of things that I remember we didn't talk about that were kind of huge in our class were the Peace of Augsburg and also the Edict of Nantes. Remember, the Peace of Augsburg gave it was basically a peace treaty between the Catholic Church and the German Lutherans, and it allowed each prince to determine what the religion was going to be, whether they were going to be Protestant or whether they were going to be Catholic. And so they had a choice at that point, basically because of the whole Protestant Reformation in Germany and everything else. And we'll cover that in Unit 2 in more detail. And then you also have the Edict of Nantes, which has to do with Catholics and Protestants, but this time in France. And Henry IV comes to the throne, and remember, he was a Protestant first, and then in order to get the throne, he became a Catholic. So he kind of renounced his ways, but he was basically just a Protestant king. And he did a lot of things to try to help them out. And so the Edict of Nantes was given to give them some more rights, give them some freedoms that they did not have before, and would be revoked later on. But we'll get to that whenever we get there. But those are two important things that we talked about with the rise of those new monarchies, with the power that was found in these kingdoms, the fact that they got better at taxing and they were able to collect more taxes and they became stronger and stronger. So you began to see kingdoms lasting much longer than they had before, and you see a lot less fractured kingdoms. Before, you would see, like, yes, there was a king, but then the nobles were super strong because they were super rich and the king had to do whatever they wanted to. You begin to see less and less of that and stronger kings. Now, talk about some technology that allowed the age of exploration to happen, which would lead us into the Columbian Exchange and so on and so forth. But the age of exploration is so important and so necessary because it opens up new trading opportunities. And remember, new trading opportunities means the middle class grows stronger and stronger. So that means that there's more money to be spent on what would normally be considered frivolous items, but it's still there. And so you have like the compass, you've got the quadrant and astrolabe, the Lantine rig, you begin to see new ship construction, stronger, sturdier ships. They used to have these tiny itty bitty ships that honestly would not have sustained any sort of activity going across to the other side of the world. And one of the things that you're going to notice as a result of this is missionaries going from Europe over to the New World, to Africa, to South America, to even North America. And you had Jesuit missionaries who went, you had Protestant missionaries who went, and they all went with the goal of sharing their faith with the Indian peoples. And so you begin to see a big change in all of that. Now, we know that Spain went primarily for the three Gs, and we know that they were rather successful for a while until the Spanish Armada kind of harmed their ability to go overseas for a while, and they kind of lost interest or a necessity. They didn't really want any more wars for a while, at least not massive ones, which had to be fought over there. And so the Spanish went over there for a long time. You had the conquistadors, you had them setting up their own plantations and everything else. They took over some of the largest Indian groups in South America on their way to North America. And so the age of exploration was all made possible because of this technology that comes around, making ships better and their ability to navigate more reliable than just simply using stars. Because again, what if it's cloudy? Hard to follow something at that point. And so definitely make sure you pay attention to all of that. You begin to see some rivals on the world stage. Remember, we talked about the 7 Years' War. That's between the English and the French, and you begin to see this change from France being the strongest to England being the strongest. And the 7 Years' War is one of those places. Remember, we talked about how you can see God at work in history, because the French were winning this war, all was going well, and then it didn't, and it all happened because of a famine that struck France, and they were unable to feed their troops. And again, if you can't feed your army, how in the world are they ever going to fight on an empty stomach? It doesn't go well. We also talked about the Treaty of Tordesillas, and I can't remember if we talked about Asiento. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't, but we can talk about that in a little more detail the next time we get together. All this activity in the New World leads to the Columbian Exchange. Remember, there were certain things that were brought from Europe to the New World, and then from the New World back to Europe. It does speak to a triangular trade as well. Whenever you have the slaves being traded for goods and so on and so forth, and you have this triangular trade that goes back and forth from Europe to Africa to the New World, Europe, Africa, New World, and so on and so forth. And so they were able to take refined goods, take slaves over to the New World, where they would plant and make crops and all these different things, cut down trees, and then they would ship these raw materials to Europe, who would refine them. And especially in the case of any sort of alcoholic product, they would take those down to Africa, pay for more slaves with that, and then just kept going back and forth. We talked about plants, flora, and fauna that went back and forth. Weeds were very problematic. There was also the diseases that were brought back and forth. For the Europeans, they were diseases like measles and measles, and you had a various other sicknesses as a result. But then smallpox, that's what I was trying to think of. And then from diseases from the New World that came to Europe, mostly sexually transmitted diseases. You do see yellow fever being a thing, but that's more in country because of all the mosquitoes. And you also see animals going from one place to another. Remember, the horses weren't normally in North and South America, and they changed the way that Indians' lives were, because, especially the Plains Indians, because of horses. And so a lot of trade back and forth in all of that. So remember a lot of those items that we talked about throughout, pigs and chickens and everything. And so lots of different things, even the crops that were taken back and forth, tomatoes, potatoes, so on and so forth. All things that would eventually change agriculture for for both the New World and the Old World as well, especially Europe. We did talk about the slave trade and the commercial revolution. Remember, the commercial revolution was brought in part by the double entry bookkeeping, the ability to see, like, okay, this person borrowed this much money and now they have paid this much money. And so you're able to keep track of everything. It was a revolution. No one ever had done this up to this point. And so double entry bookkeeping goes a long way for people to be able to collect their debts and be able to get paid for monies that they have put out. So that's important. And by the way, that leads to banks being more successful. The Bank of Amsterdam is one that we mentioned, very popular. And the Bank of Amsterdam was, I believe, if I remember correctly, the first bank, state bank that was ever run. You also see the introduction of the Dutch East India Company with better bookkeeping processes, and also the British East India Company will come about, and those two will kind of fight it out, and Britain will win, and they will be the main and really the only company represented by a government in India. But the British and the Dutch, this kind of sets up their future squabbles over who's going to be the most powerful in the commercial industry. And remember, all of this fighting is due to mercantilism, this idea that there's only so much of gold or any sort of product in the world, and if you're going to get more of it, you got to steal it from someone else. And so make sure you pay attention to that. Remember, we also talked about the enclosure movement being a big deal, and No, I don't think we talked about that. We did talk about the enclosure movement though, where farmers began to like close up their land because, well, if you had a rancher and a farmer living right next to each other, then the one has cows and they come over and they eat all the crops from the farmer. Things get a little tense, so they have the enclosure movement, and what that does is it kind of it shuts out the possibility of peasants being able to purchase any sort of land on their own, and so you kind of start to see this reversion or this uh, backwards pedaling into not necessarily feudalism again, but to start seeing the distance between the poor and the rich once more. Also, people begin moving to cities more at this point. And this is going to be problematic. Remember, diseases like bad sanitation is going to lead to diseases. There's going to be employment issues because there's not enough jobs to go around, poverty because people can't work. And whenever people can't work and they're poor, they commit crimes. And so Europe at that point in history has a lot to do to figure out how do we make cities safer? How do we employ these people who no longer can work on farms because there's really no point for them being there? And there will be some, remember, there's also going to be some inventions that are going to come up soon that are going to push more and more people away from farms. And so how are we going to house these people? How are we going to grow our cities large enough to be able to do anything with them? And so a lot of these are going to challenge the cities and challenge Europe to either fix it or be in for some serious problems in the coming days. That's most of what Unit 1's about. Again, I might have left a few things out here or there. We can kind of finish that up tomorrow whenever we meet. And then we can jump right into Unit 2 once we are done. Yeah, hopefully you guys are doing good. I didn't want this to be a super in-depth review because I like doing more in-depth with you guys. But just wanted to kind of touch on everything else in Unit 1. And if you need anything else, please make sure you're ready with questions tomorrow whenever we get together. All right? Look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Bye.